Greetings, people. This is the Mexican American channel. You are welcome to join us. Hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet.
The Chicago we know was built by hands you may not have learned about. A new exhibit in Pilsen shows how immigrant rail workers helped shape this city, and it connects then to now.
There isn't a central archive across the country where you can easily find records of Mexican-American railroad workers.
But those records do exist, and they live across families, files, and places. This exhibit brings those pieces into the same space, not to speak for them, to let them speak for themselves. The name on the door is Rieles y Raíces, Rails and Roots, a walkthrough more than a century of Mexican and Mexican-American rail labor in Chicago and the Midwest.
It was really a labor of love to be able to finally tell stories that were basically almost forgotten.
That labor started with questions close to home. Ismael Cuevas helped curate the exhibit. He grew up in Chicago in a family shaped by immigration. Years studying Mexican and Latino history taught him to look where textbooks had passed over.
Asking families to literally dig into their shoeboxes and find family photos, documents of their ancestors.
Those keepsakes became the foundation. Photos of workers, letters sent home, pay stubs from rail companies, pieces of daily life held on to for generations.
The city was formed by trains. Railways is what put Chicago on the map.
And maps make that clear. Rail lines from across the country still converge here. Cesario Moreno is the museum's visual arts director. He says time moves forward as you walk through the gallery. And at the center, scale and detail hold you there.
Through the research that Ismael and Dr. Benavides did, they were able to identify boxcar settlements within the Chicago area, within the city proper.
Inside the city, not at the edge. Boxcars were not storage, they were homes.
We're in winter right now. It's, in the zeros, 10 degrees, 20 degrees. Imagine living in an unheated boxcar in the middle of the winter, and these families were still able to thrive.
Families cooked there, slept there, raised children there. All of it feet from moving steel.
There were a lot of accidents. It wasn't a clean environment, but they built churches. They got married, they had funerals, all the really important things that happen in a person's life.
This is the only housing that Mexicans were able to access, whether it was this housing discrimination, whether it was just the ability to be close to work. And so it was this kind of discovery that I fell upon by looking at census data.
So this actually reflects the map, and that reflects the census, and that's all new, brand new information, which, that's always great for future historians, and they have something to build on and something to go on.
Some records list railroad intersections instead of street addresses. Researchers match those points to historic maps that places these communities inside Chicago neighborhoods that still stand.
It's not our fault as an individual that we didn't learn this. Systematically, we're not being taught this, right? When we hear rhetoric of critical race theory and, curriculums being too woke, they're targeting our people's histories, right? The people who built these cities, the people who built this country.
This exhibit gives that history weight. A spiker used on the line, a welding mask worn on the job, tools that kept commerce moving and families going. Community formed in constant motion, and the past pulls even with the present.
Similar to what's happening now with Trump's administration using Operation Midway Blitz, we had in 1954 Operation Wetback, and this is 70 years ago that these communities in Chicago are being targeted. And we have railroad workers, we have the records that show them they had just bought homes here in Chicago, whether it was in Fuller Park, whether it was in back of the yards. They had just bought homes, establishing the American dream, and they have to get sent back to Mexico, right? On the same railroads they had built decades earlier.
The exhibit holds those records together. Labor, home, belonging. Threads not interpreted, not summarized, left to speak for themselves.
We are the living, breathing seeds of our ancestors, and we're sprouting.
A a lot of these individuals whose families built these tracks and maintained them are now lawyers, they're doctors, they're artists, they're people at universities.
When the rhetoric is that you don't belong and you shouldn't be here, the records say otherwise.
The exhibit is on view at the National Museum of Mexican Art in Pilsen. Admission is free and it runs through April 26th.
The U.S.-Mexican War, 1846 through 1848, and the annexation by the United States of Mexico's northern borderlands shaped socioeconomic relations between two peoples and cultures. The impact of this war tossed people of Mexican background into a similar social trajectory in the United States as other non-white peoples, especially American, Indians, and Africans. In the minds of most European Americans, their victory over Mexico reinforced the notion of white supremacy and manifest destiny. This conquest opened the Southwest to American technology and markets, which in turn made Mexican labor in the newly stolen land, conquered lands available for appropriating. Mexicans, along with Mexican Americans and Mexican immigrants, were instrumental in building the railroads of the U.S. Southwest, with an estimated 2/3 of the track labor force in the region being of Mexican descent by the 1920s. These laborers, known as Traqueros Spanish for track workers, were essential in building and expanding the American railroad system from the mid-19th to mid-20th centuries, laying tracks across the Southwest, Central Plains, Midwest, with tens of thousands employed under harsh conditions for low wages, creating distinct communities and leaving a significant but often overlooked legacy in U.S. Following the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad and after the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, a labor shortage occurred, leading to the recruitment of Mexican and Mexican American men for railroad workers. Anti-Chinese violence signaled an important change in track labor employment in the West. The combined impact of anti-Chinese violence and cessation of the legal flow of Chinese into the West made Mexicans the next logical source of labor from the perspective of railroads. Even as railroads and mines continued to employ Chinese, those already in the country, anti-Chinese hysteria manifested in riots, which literally drove Chinese workers out of towns and off work sites. Mexican labor on America's railroads is only part of the larger process of the great waves of immigrant labor from Europe and Asia, like Chinese, Irish, Italian, Greek, and Eastern European immigrants. The U.S. federal government's Immigration Act 1917, while curtailing European immigration, exempted Mexican immigrants coming to work in the U.S. from its restrictions, largely because of the abundant reliance on Mexican labor in the railroad industry. By 1922, Mexican workers constituted 85% of the railroad workforce in the Southwest. Their work was crucial for connecting markets, facilitating agriculture, and developing the region's infrastructure. Traqueros were instrumental in creating the rail networks that connected the growing nation, fueling economic growth and connecting communities. They performed strenuous work like laying rails, building bridges, constructing tunnels, maintaining tracks. Known for their strong work ethic, they endured extreme weather and difficult environments. Beyond their technical contributions, the Traqueros also left a lasting cultural impact on the regions they worked in. Their traditions, music, and cuisine became intertwined with the communities they joined, enriching the tapestry of American culture. They often encountered discrimination, hazardous working conditions, and inadequate pay. Despite these hardships, they persevered, making essential contributions to the nation's infrastructure. Occasionally, veteran Traqueros demonstrated knowledge superior to that of their supervisors and foremen. While horrible accidents did occur, Traqueros, more commonly, lost a finger or two, smashed a foot or hand, or busted a limb. Ironically, some foremen preferred to hire men who were missing fingers. Missing fingers signified experience, and presumably meant that such an employee would be more careful. The legacy of Traqueros is largely forgotten in U.S. history books about labor and the building of our country, but recent and ongoing scholarship is revealing the vital role of Traqueros in the strengthening of the U.S. economy, transportation system, and large-scale industry since the Civil War. Mexican citizens came to the United States during World War II to work the most grueling railroad jobs through a contractual agreement between the U.S. and Mexican governments. In 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9139, which established the War Manpower Commission. Mexico and the United States entered into an agreement in 1942 and laid the groundwork for laborers to travel to the United States and work on farms across the nation, picking produce, planting crops, and packing train cars. With much of the American male workforce stationed overseas or working for the war effort in the States, the agriculture industry was in desperate need of field hands. Soon after, in 1943, the railroad industry followed suit, starting with Southern Pacific Railroad asking for federal support in filling thousands of positions. The Bracero program was a U.S.-Mexico agreement allowing millions of Mexican men to work legally as temporary agricultural and railroad laborers, addressing wartime labor shortages. But it became the largest guest workers program in U.S. history, offering temporary contracts with promises of fair wages, housing, and conditions that were often unmet, leading to exploitation, low wages, and labor issues that influenced later movements like the United Farm Workers. With the majority of the U.S. labor force off fighting the war, Mexican workers were needed to quickly build railroad lines so that key supplies could be transported across the country for shipping to the front lines. The Bracero program was a noble cause, and they were promised suitable housing and fair pay. It quickly became clear that they were being exploited by all sides. If it wasn't the railroad companies cheating them out of pay or making them live in inhumane conditions, it was the Mexican banks denying them access to the accounts that held their earnings. And of course, there were always corrupt government officials on both sides who turned a blind eye to the workers' complaints. Many Traqueros were forced to live in pest-ridden boxcars in the middle of nowhere, often without running water or electricity. Boxcars represented the most degraded type of housing. Originally constructed to haul freight or passengers, but now well beyond their useful life, these wooden cars were converted by the railroads into makeshift living quarters. During the summer, when temperatures reached 90 degrees or more in many areas of the West, the old steel freight cars became unbearably hot. In the winter, when temperatures plummeted, the cars were excruciatingly cold. Being mobile, however, the boxcars were practical. Companies could easily move the laborers from work site to work site or situate the cars somewhere as semi-permanent quarters. The work was grueling and thankless, but nonetheless crucial. Let us also not forget how Mexican workers helped us during one of our nation's darkest hours, and how their hard work not only aided that war effort, but also left us with an infrastructure that enabled our nation to develop as rapidly as it did throughout the rest of the 20th century. Participating railroads, such as the Southern Pacific Railroad and Delaware and Western Railroad, kept meticulous records about wages, injuries, and deaths, but many of these records are buried deep in private company archives or railroad museum repositories. Overwhelmed by backlogs and reference requests, the archivists themselves are at times unaware of the secrets hiding in their vaults. Government reports and private railroad company records glossed over and buried facts about Mexican worker protests, deplorable living conditions, and racially fueled abuses. The Traqueros experiences are coming to light as technology allows easier access to archival records, and activists fight for financial reparations and historical recognition. The railroad program ended more abruptly than the agricultural branch. Union workers wanted their jobs back, and with the war over, the railroad companies could no longer claim they were desperate for track laborers. While their contributions may not be significantly acknowledged by historians, Traqueros are an integral part of the American railroad story. The archival records of the Traquero program, however, were compromised from the start. The Mexican and United States governments did not thoroughly document, acknowledge, or investigate complaints, injuries, and deaths. In an attempt to limit what the public and the Mexican government learned about injuries, the railroad companies and the Railroad Retirement Board were selective about which records were made public. It is documented that letters home to loved ones in Mexico were censored, furthering the distortion of the true Traquero story. Another detrimental case of poor record keeping is the Mexican bank's mismanagement of the 10% paycheck deduction earmarked for Traquero retirement funds. Traqueros and their family members fought for their retirement money. Neither the contracts nor the original negotiators anticipated that the banks in question, sometimes conspiring with Mexican government officials and agencies, would fabricate elaborate obstacles that prevented the Traqueros from receiving their savings. Neither the contracts nor the original negotiators anticipated that the banks in question, sometimes conspiring with Mexican government officials and agencies, would fabricate elaborate obstacles that prevented the Traqueros from receiving their savings. Lawsuits filed against the United States government and Wells Fargo Bank were eventually dismissed. Public outcry in Mexico, however, did spur President Vicente Fox to agree in 2005 to pay $3,500 to each Traquero or descendant with valid proof of employment. And this concludes for tonight's broadcast. Until next time, family, and always remember our people are the backbone of the U.S.